Hello, welcome to another episode of Field Screens Podcast. Today we'll be talking about VHS 2. With the first VHS getting a lot of attention and earning a lot of money, the producers came back to make the second one. In this second film of this found footage anthology, you can tell there's a lot more money there. It's a lot more planned out. And there's just a lot more better reasons of why they are filming during the skits. I just want to say that first and foremost. This was really an important movie in the franchise to make it a franchise. I mean, if this anthology, if it would have stunk, if it wouldn't have went well, I mean, people would have just said VHS was lightning in a bottle. It would have been a great standalone movie, and it probably would have ended after this movie. So, with VHS 2 doing a pretty darn good job doing a follow up, that's what kind of launches these two movies into a franchise itself, which is still going today. Now, before I continue, I am kind of getting over something, so if my voice sounds a little raspy, I apologize. But I wanted to get this review done. That way we could keep things chugging along. I'm going to go through each different segment of VHS 2 and tell you what I think. So let's start with the very first one, the prologue, tape 49. It involves two investigators who break into a missing student's house and find disturbing VHS tapes. Again, this is a segment that's kind of the glue. It holds all the other segments together. It's the reason why you're watching these different videotapes. And I will say this glue segment, I like it a lot better than the first one in VHS. One, there's not really any sleazy moments. In the first one, you got sexual assault. You got a bunch of different just weird things. If you happen to be watching the movie like with your family, you're kind of like, oh, this was a bad choice. I forgot this goes on here. Or if you're like me and someone comes knocking on your door looking for your neighbor, and you have the movie playing, it kind of leaves for an embarrassing moment. But yes, besides the sleazy moments, this one's a lot more to the point. It doesn't linger on it that much. I mean, it knows its job. We tune into this because we want to watch the different movies, the different VHS tapes, and get scared by different scenes. We don't need to linger on this little glue segment here. They give us a quick little story. They're looking for a student. They find a VHS of that student talking. He clearly doesn't look well. It's a very dark house. TVs all over the place. VHS is piled up. And here we go. And they're looking around the house, and one of them sits in front of a TV, and they're like, oh, let's check this out. Let's start watching these VHS tapes. It's a lot quicker. Again, we're not lingering on stuff. And it gets right to the point. So the glue segment is definitely better, in my opinion, in this movie compared to VHS 1. Now, when this glue segment goes in between the different tapes, it literally is not very long at all. And it does give like little spooky, there's that old big guy that's in the house just kind of hiding around the corners, and every time they get a new VHS tape, he's kind of like popping his head out, and you're like, oh no, he's gonna get him. There's suspense there, and it's fun. That's the point of these movies. So again, it does a very good job. And then at the end, whenever this little glue segment wraps up, the girl detective dies, and the guy's like trying to figure it all out. But the girl like rises from the dead, and there's kind of like a little subplot story of, if you watch these tapes in a certain order, it can mess with your head. But yeah, the girl detective's dead. The guy's looking around like, oh, like what's going on here? And then the girl like attacks him, rises from the dead. He snaps her neck, but when he snaps her neck, she starts crawling on all fours like The Grudge. It was awesome. I was like, oh my God, it's creepy. So again, the glue segment just doing a very good job. And then he eventually goes into the closet, and that big burly fat dude, he's just waiting for him covered in blood. Very, very good opening. I enjoyed the glue segment, which the first one I was kind of like, whatever. That's the glue segment there. Let's talk about the next one. So the first overall VHS tape that we watched is called Phase 1 Clinical Trials. And it starts off with a bang, which if you're a person who's always like, why are they filming? Why are they still holding the camera? This one revolves around a guy who had a robot eye. That was a terrible way of phrasing it. They inserted an eye, a mechanical eye that records what he's seeing. It's like this little medical experiment that they're doing. So whatever that this guy sees, you're watching it too from the his point of view. It took me forever to describe that. But it's very clever because again, like it knocks that criticism of why are they filming. I'm never one who goes down that road. I mean, for me, if I'm watching found footage, I'm just hoping they entertain me. So yeah, it does a good job with that. So you're seeing everything this guy's seeing. And he goes home. He's trying to just relax. His house is a mess. Kind of looks like my room when my wife's not yelling at me to clean it up. But soon he starts to, it's like the sixth sense. He starts to see dead people. It does it a pretty effective way. When it's nighttime at his house, it's pretty spooky. A little girl just keeps popping around the corner every other time. There's like a very pale guy he sees. But eventually a girl, which he sees while he's at the medical office, she shows up at his doorstep and she's like, hey, I know what's going on. We got to talk. And he's like, oh, okay. And she's like, yeah, give me a beer. And he's like, what? Who are you? And she's like, oh, don't worry about it. Just get me a beer. So he ends up getting her a beer. And she starts describing to him that she kind of had the same medical surgery, but with her ears. She hears the dead. He can see it. She can hear it. And she's going through it. You can't interact with the dead. The more you interact with them, the more they can interact with you. So it's a pretty scary premise there. But these ghosts keep showing up one after another, more and more. And the girl's like, well, I'm going to have to distract you. I got a plan. Then she starts stripping and then they start to have sex. And you get a first person point of view of him having sex with this girl. And by the end of it, he goes into the bathroom, looks into the mirror and he goes, listen, I want a copy of that. Put it on a disc or something and just give it to me. Don't watch it. But yeah, just give me a copy of that. And in my head, I'm like, man, you would have fit in with those dudes from the first movie who were trashing the houses and, just doing whatever. But yeah, eventually we get back to it though. And the girl's advice, it's not very sound. Eventually she gets dragged into his pool. She drowns. And then the guy like freaks out and it ends. The only way for this segment to make sense, he goes into the bathroom and tries to dig out the mechanical eye so he can't see it anymore, which I think is pretty reasonable by that point. Like if you're getting haunted by ghosts that can kill you because you can see them, that's a pretty reasonable thing to do, I think. But it doesn't matter though, because those ghosts end up getting him and they shove the eye down his throat, which is a crazy thing to see. So again, this movie, it starts off with a bang. Just like VHS 1 with the girl who was like part vampire, whatever you want to call her, that just tears up the entire clan of guys that try to take her back to the hotel room. This was another just very good segment to start with. Very exciting, very scary. I'm going to get you excited for the rest of the segments you're going to watch. The next segment's called A Ride in the Park. This one was directed by Eduardo Sanchez, I believe, who directed the Blair Witch Project, so that's pretty cool. This one's about the guy who, he's on his bike, he's going through like a park, and then like a zombie apocalypse happened, he gets bit, and through like his GoPro, you get like the first person view of a zombie, which is kind of cool. You don't really get that too often. So it's a really clever idea. I will say, out of all these segments, and man, like it's, when I say this, like this is like no offense to this segment itself, I think this might be the weaker one out of the 4 or 5 different segments, besides the glue segment, because I don't think that really counts. I don't really count that towards the other ones. But this one might be the weakest one, but it's still kind of fun. You see the first person shot of him just being a zombie attacking people. Some of the stuff's pretty funny. He's like pulling out wallets, trying to eat it because he's a dumb zombie. He even bites his own arm because, zombies don't have brains. They're dumb. That's the joke. But eventually it gets to a birthday party. There's someone with a camcorder filming a birthday party at the park. And you're like, oh, Jesus, like, don't do it to a little girl's birthday party. Like, it's their big day. But the zombies come, and you get that first-person shot of them attacking all the parents, all of them running away, getting cars, trying to flee. And And then eventually you get the guy who's infected. You see his demise through, his GoPro. There was a little moment, I think they tried to make him have emotion as a zombie. Like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. But then he gets killed before, like, you really find out if, he realizes what he's doing. So it's an interesting one. But again, I think out of these four or five, I think it's the weaker one out of the group. The next segment we're going to talk about is called Safe Haven. And this is the cleanup hitter. Man, oh man. Like this was the star segment. Definitely while I was watching it. I remembered it from the first time I watched it way back in high school. I remember it creeped me out hard. And I was like, well, it's been a couple of years. Like, no, this one's still, it's still the big chancho. It starts off with the film crew. They're trying to infiltrate an Indonesian cult. They're in the film crew. There's the main guy who's in charge of the crew. There's the lady who is married to the guy who's in charge of the crew. Then they have a friend there who also helps out. I think he's the main camera guy. And then there's one other person who I think is kind of like the understudy, or maybe he's a sound guy. I think he's a sound guy. There's four people total. But as they're going through this little complex that the cult, relies in, you're seeing all these things. Like there's classrooms where they're indoctrinating kids to be part of this cult. And they're like literally talking to the leader. And like this guy, he's a little man, but he's a fiery little man. He's got the Napoleon complex. It starts off, I don't even want to say calm. Because it's still fun, like while they're interviewing them and all that. But eventually the lady in the group, like she's about to be sick. She's like, I got to go downstairs. She goes. One of the dudes, he's like, oh, I'm going to go like check on her. And they still got their like mics hooked up to them. And like the main guy, he's like just kind of waiting around. He's like, well, I should probably go check on her too. I think that's what he went to do. But eventually the lady and the guy, there's a little subplot and it's pretty heartbreaking. They were having an affair on the main guy who was in charge of the crew, and he can hear it through the earpieces while they're talking about it. And it turns out that lady is impregnated by the guy she's having an affair with. So it's just like heartbreaking for this dude who's like, he thinks he's on this big project that he's going to break ground on this cult. He's super excited, and then he hears this, and he's just like deflated completely. But we don't rely on that too long, because once things start getting funky with this cult, it's balls to the wall. Like literally, it's like the cult members are super creepy. Every single one of them, just the way they talk, they move. They'll walk in on a group of cult members, and all of them will shoot themselves in the head. And here's, I think, a reason why the last segment is the weakest one. The cult members come back as zombies. So you get more zombies, in the very next segment. And man, it is so much scarier than the one that's at the park. Literally, like it's a blood fest. Things basically just turn to hell while they're at this little complex. It was so good. Even now watching it to now, it creeped me out. Like that's the last place I would want to be. I'd rather have the mechanical eye. I'd rather be at the park while zombies are attacking. Being at this little cult complex where they're, just killing people mercilessly. They take the pregnant chick into a room, and they like try to like summon like the demon god from her stomach, or like I forget what the reason was completely, but everything's just messed up in this segment. And even during like all the madness, like while this is going on, the little subplot of the lady getting pregnant by the friend, the two dudes like end up kind of having a final moment. It's even kind of like an emotional moment. But then like once like one of them's dead, like things are still going haywire, and you go from like, man, I feel for the dude, but then you're like, oh my god, I hope he gets out. Like it's just crazy. So if you were someone who had worked on this segment, because sometimes like people who make these movies that I cover, that they'll chime in on the comments, and that's pretty cool. But if there's anyone who had anything to do with this segment, hats off to you guys, because yeah, like that by far my favorite segment out of 2 and 1 so far. When I rank these, it's going to be very hard to beat Safe Haven. I'll say that right now. That's king of the hill right now. But let's move on to the final one. The final segment's called Slumber Party and Alien Abduction. Very fun name. And this is a very fun segment. But I will say, before the aliens even come into, come to play, there's like two siblings. I think the parents leave the house. So the older sister, like she's in charge. She invites like her boyfriend and maybe like another friend. She has a little brother who invites like all of his little minions. And they just like have fun while parents are gone. But one thing that kind of just caught my attention watching it this time around, the pranks that these two siblings pull on each other, they're crazy pranks. Like one, the little brother and like all of his friends, I'm pretty sure they put pee and squirt guns and spray their sister and the boyfriend and their friend with them, and they're like, oh, classic, And then there's a part to where the older sister and the boyfriend, they're having sex, and the little kids, like they know that's going on, and they're like, oh, let's go in there and just make a bunch of noise and act all crazy, and they like run into the room, and both of them are embarrassed because like they're naked, and the little brother and his friends are just like, oh, you having fun? What's going on here? And it's like, dude, like I couldn't imagine doing that to really anyone, let alone like a sibling. That is just so wrong. And then the older sister, you think she'd have a little more sense. I know she's mad because of the pee and them barging in on a good time. But then I think the little brother, like he's like masturbating in her room and like all of his friends are asleep. And she's like, oh, well, let's embarrass him. And then they go in there, they put the camera on a dog, and the dog like runs up to him while he's doing it. And he's like, what the? And I think the dog's name is Tank. And he's like, Tank, what are you doing? And the sister's like, oh, you're doing that in front of all your friends? And he's like, no. And like, I'm like, man, that's cold. That's just, one, he shouldn't be doing that. If I was that kid's friend, I would never spend the night at his house ever again. Yeah, that's a no-go. But even with him doing something as wrong as that, for the older sister to expose him, man, oh man. An older person was like watching this movie and was just shaking their head, and they're like, kids these days have just gone out of control. Out of control. The kids these days, And that's what, like, while I'm watching it, I'm like, man, like, I just feel like that's not an accurate representation of kids. But there are just weird incidents out there, so I'll just leave it at that. Now, when the aliens finally come, it is great. Like, there's a part where the house is, like, all dark, and then, like, a gigantic light, like, I think a tractor beam happens, and an alien flies across the room and, like, tackles a kid. You literally, like, I like jumped out of my seat. I was like, oh, I forgot that happened. But these aliens just pursue these kids nonstop. Like they don't quit. Like there's literally a scene of an alien taking one of the little brother or the little brother's friends in sleeping bags and like dragging them into the lake. And you just get like the first person point of view of the little kid in a sleeping bag, and he's like tumbling around, like clearly hurt. And then water starts to flood into the sleeping bag. Like that is some scary imagery there. Like just picturing yourself in that bag. Some other moments, they do just a great job with the lights. Whenever like the spaceship or the tractor beam happens, it sounds like a freaking train. It's like, you're really rooting for these kids to get away despite their little shenanigans in the beginning. But eventually, I think the aliens get them all. And by the end of it, like the little brother has the dog, which has had the camera on it the entire time. Again, clever use of camera. But the little brother's like crying, like, oh, we need to get away. And like, they even like trick the kids. Like there's like lights, like police lights. And they're like, oh, please help us. But really it's just the aliens. And they like start capturing them. They capture the older sister. And then like when it comes to little boy, there's just a bright light. You see him like fly up into the sky, and he's like trying to hold on to his dog. And then he lets go, and the poor dog like falls all the way down and dies. And then like that's when the segment ends. Like it's a very cold ending to the final segment of this movie. Very fitting though. That's kind of the predictable thing with found footage movies. Eventually everyone's going to die who's involved in it, because that's why it's found footage. You never see someone like, and we lived happily ever after. You wish it would happen, but it usually just never pans out that way. So, yeah, this was a fantastic follow up to VHS 1. I will say I like VHS 2 better than VHS 1. I will go out and say that. And I like VHS 1. That's not me crapping on it. I liked all the parts in 1, besides like the kind of sleaziness. I was like, it's kind of unneeded. But 2, it just does a better job. It learns from its mistakes, it gets to the point, and it gets you those segments, and the segments are very good. So again, I really enjoyed the sequel. It has me excited for the next one, but I've kind of saw reviews, and a lot of people say the next one's not that great. So I'll find that out. I don't think I've ever seen the third one, so I'll talk about it when I get to the next episode. But if you're still with me this far, thank you so much for listening. I do appreciate everyone that listens. It's awesome that I get people tuning in episode after episode. I greatly appreciate it. And when you leave comments, tell me what you think. That's fantastic. I like hearing different viewpoints. If you could give the video a like, it spreads it to other people, which helps the channel. If you haven't subscribed and you like found footage and you like the VHS movies, go ahead and subscribe so you know when the next one's coming out. So again, thank you so much for listening. And we're gonna cover that next VHS movie. That's gonna be the next one in this trilogy. I can't think of the name, but yeah, we're gonna hit it. So again, thank you so much, and until next time, guys.